as we begin here, for those who are newer to Just Solutions and those who have been attending our series, welcome back. Here at Just Solutions, we're a national organization that works to support environmental and climate justice coalitions at the state level. The goal is to really help advance policies that are community driven, rooted in environmental justice, support healthy and resilient communities. And we do that in a few ways by convening partners across states to provide research and policy support, to offer educational spaces like this one so we can share ideas and strategy, ask questions, and learn horizontally. So, again, excited that y'all are here. We're working across a number of states. So, these sessions are really trying to bring that collective experience together. A few housekeeping points. This session is being recorded. The discussion portions will not be recorded as to keep that a candid space for folks to share. We will share the slides and the recording after the session. And then another note, I know some of us have Otter AI or different note takers activated for Zoom. We really do ask that in this session you don't use those third-party recording tools so we can protect the privacy and confidentiality of participants and some of the content that is shared. So yeah, please refrain from using any unauthorized recording or transcription services. And again, we will share a recording. Sweet. Awesome. So this series has been focused on different energy affordability strategies, namely some pillars of energy affordability. Across the series, we started with talking about household protections, focused on what are some of the immediate relief strategies to this growing and burgeoning energy affordability crisis. Then we moved on to utility reform and looked at how decisions are made in regulatory bodies and other entities and how to hold those systems accountable. And then our previous session, we talked about building decarbonization, how costs show up in practice with building decarb, what are different design options to lower costs and increase access to benefits. And today we want to focus on funding and financing. So the strategies today will really be around how are some of our clean energy or environmental justice solutions resourced, how are costs allocated across the system, and the core question is who pays and how does that shape what's possible for more durable solutions? Next. Oh, so we'll start with a perspective on polluter pays, which is one non-ratepayer funding option. Then we'll move on to a local funding model. Then we'll speak about state policy options, in particular cap and invest. Then we'll open it up to a Q&A and some regional breakout discussions, and we'll close with some next steps. So, why funding and financing? That might sound a little redundant to this audience. But what we're really speaking about today is what are the affordability strategies that rely on non-ratepayer funding options? Many strategies rely on ratepayer funding, like different utility energy efficiency programs, et cetera. And this is as energy costs are increasing, which is raising affordability concerns nationally. And we heard across the sessions, especially the last breakout groups, is funding is certainly a limiting factor for a lot of groups we work with in trying to advance some of their energy solutions. So we really want to talk about how do we determine cost allocation, who pays, who benefits, and are there more durable funding options available? If not, what is needed to try to sustain our energy affordability efforts over time? And yeah. So, to start us off, we're going to look at one approach that focuses on funding, on shifting funding and where funding comes from. We're going to hear from Sara Shor with Fossil Free Media, who'll talk about polluter pay strategies and how they're being advanced. And with that, Sara, I'll hand it over to you.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Really happy to be with you all today, and I apologize for the background noise. Please let me know if it's bad so I can try and shift things. But hello, everyone. My name is Sara Shor. I'm the Director of Organizing and Partnerships with Fossil Free Media, and I also help lead the National Make Polluters Pay campaign. And I'm wondering if someone can put up the slide. Thank you. Awesome. If you could just go to keep going, keep going. Great. So I'm going to start this with a little bit of context. And I'm going to be talking here about basically strategies to make the biggest polluters in the world pay for the climate crisis so the rest of us don't have to pay those costs. So just starting with a little context, I know you all already know much of this context, but this new this new administration, Trump is attacking clean energy, giving major handouts to big oil. We're talking about, you know, he's rolling back clean energy policies, clean air and water regulation. He's approving fossil fuel projects left and right that communities have been fighting and resisting for decades. He's holding back federal recovery money for climate disasters. And of course, he's starting unpopular and immoral wars in multiple places. So that's the context we're living in. Next slide. We're also in the midst of just continuing and worsening climate disasters across the country and world. LA fires were a major disaster last year. Next slide. Hurricane Helene. Next slide. I can go to the next one. You all name it. I'm sure everybody on this call is in a place that has experienced some kind of climate disaster, and we're really seeing the cost of that. So in 2024, NOAA tracked 27 confirmed billion-dollar climate disasters, resulting in $182.7 billion alone. The total cost of the last 10 years is 1.4 trillion. So we're talking about huge amounts of money that cities and states are having to pay to recover from these horrible disasters. And of course, because of climate change, they're increasing in frequency and severity, and people who are already impacted by multiple crises and economics are the ones who are hardest hit by these crises. Next slide. Right now, taxpayers are shouldering the entire burden of this. They're shouldering increased cost of recovery after disasters. Insurance giants are abandoning high-risk areas, which is also driving costs up. We're seeing, obviously, rising utility bills, property taxes, medical expenses, and working families are just facing the worst of it. Unaffordable housing, rent, cost of living, everything is going up. We all know this. Next slide. And of course, essential workers are on the front line. When climate disasters strike, essential workers are the ones who are protecting our communities, and they're often lacking adequate resources, training, or support to do that. Firefighters working really long weeks. Some of those firefighters are folks who are incarcerated. Teachers, we're seeing schools closing due to wildfires. We're seeing, schools that can't handle the changing weather because of climate change. Healthcare workers are treating increased heat illnesses, smoke inhalation. Farm workers are having to work outdoors with inadequate protection from extreme heat and smoke, and sometimes fires themselves. Domestic workers aren't having any protections during evacuations and disasters, and the list goes on. Next slide. And on top of all this, state budgets are just stretched to a breaking point. Every state budget does not have enough money to recover from these disasters. Next slide. So basically, these costs are falling to all of us. And these are huge costs that are falling to taxpayers across this country. So the solution is to make polluters pay. And why should we make polluters pay? Next slide. Again, you all know this. Fossil fuels are the largest driver of climate change. And next slide. And oil and gas executives have known for decades about the dangers of fossil fuels, and they've continued to produce their products. They've covered up the health impacts from their products, and they've continued to operate, um, no matter the consequences, while sort of hiding the truth from the rest of us. Next slide. And all the while, they are making a ton of money while we suffer and pay the cost. ExxonMobil is making over $70,000 per a minute. That's more than most people make in a year. And these companies knew about climate change for decades. They spent billions of dollars covering it up, and they are profiting while we pay these prices. Next slide. So the solution is to make polluters pay. There's a bunch of ways that we can actually do that. Next slide. I'm going to talk mostly about climate superfunds, but I want to talk about some of the other ways that folks are making polluters pay across this country right now. And I imagine that many people on this call are potentially already involved in some of these campaigns at the state level. But right now, there's a growing push to make polluters pay these costs, so the rest of us don't have to. 12 states and Congress have introduced bills to make polluters pay called climate superfund legislation, which I'm going to talk a little bit about. 2 of those states have actually already passed climate superfund legislation, New York and Vermont. 33 states and municipalities and tribes are now suing big oil for climate damages. And there's also lawyers who are building the case for criminal indictments against the industry. And I don't know if there's anyone in here from Richmond, California, but cities are also running successful local campaigns to hold the industry accountable and make them pay for their harm. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate superfund bills. This is what I work on the most, and we've seen this campaign really spread very fast across the country, and many states are introducing legislation. So climate superfund bills are how to make polluters pay for the damage they're doing to our climate and communities. Next slide. So the origins of the Superfund program come from Lois Gibbs and Love Canal. Basically, folks in that community found out that toxic chemicals were poisoning their children, and they sparked a nationwide movement that helped establish the first Superfund program. Next slide. And Superfund is basically right now our largest environmental remediation program that was established by Congress in 1980. And basically it operates on a polluter pay principle. So it basically collects money from the polluters who have caused harm in communities to clean up their mess, essentially. Next slide. So climate superfunds apply that polluters pay principle to greenhouse gas emissions, and states either choose an amount of damages or they set up a process to calculate them. So basically they'll say, climate change has cost the state of New York $75 billion. And so we're actually going to charge the biggest fossil fuel polluters for that $75 billion based on their percentage of emissions, global emissions, since emissions travel across state lines. So they require the largest fossil fuel companies, and these are like really the largest. They're the ones with over 1 billion tons of carbon emissions to pay into the fund based on their share of emissions over an established period. Next slide. So who would pay? Again, the biggest polluters. The details vary by state, but each bill really does only target the largest fossil fuel companies. We're not talking about mom and pop gas stations. We're not talking about even the smaller oil and gas companies. These are the biggest multinational companies who are making billions off of the suffering of the rest of us. Next slide. So where would the money go? This is important, I think, especially for this series. So the money would go to state managed funds for climate resilience projects, mitigation, adaptation, and just transition support. It prioritizes frontline communities or low income neighborhoods. This is defined differently in different bills, but all of the bills that have been introduced collect 35 to 40% of the funds would be used for frontline communities, EJ communities, defined slightly different state by state. and we're talking about a lot of money here. States like New York are looking to collect 75 billion, and the federal legislation is $1 trillion that they're looking to collect from these companies. Next slide. I mentioned also that many cities and states and tribes are also running lawsuits where they're suing the fossil fuel industry. So these Superfund bills are complementary but parallel tracks. Basically, climate Superfund legislation works to set up a fund to deal with climate impacts, while climate lawsuits work to hold the companies legally accountable for misinformation. Next slide. One of the arguments that the industry uses is that the cost will be passed on to consumers. We've done a ton of research with economists. There's no justification to make consumers pay. The penalties don't impact the cost of production, so they're actually paying for past harms. And big oil is making record profits and engaging in massive stock buybacks. Also, the reason they can't pass it on to their consumers is because if one company like raises their price in a certain place, they'll have too much competition from other companies. Like the price of gas is a competitive market, so smaller companies will win out the market share if the cost is getting passed on to consumers. Also, we're already paying the cost of the climate crisis and of this crisis. So really the best way to help control prices is to pass stricter regulations on the industry. Otherwise, they're going to keep making us pay the cost of their profit. Next slide. So how does the climate disaster response? I mean, the demand to make polluters pay just provides us with an immediate way to respond to every climate disaster. It really provides a tangible action to take in response to events. So I live in California. When the LA wildfires broke out last year, it was very compelling to have a specific policy that we could point to that said, hey, this policy is going to make polluters pay to help people in LA rebuild and create, more resilience for future disasters. And how is this, sorry, next slide. How is this an environmental justice policy? As we know, low income and BIPOC communities bear the brunt of climate impacts. They're paying the cost more than anybody else right now. And this is all while polluters profit. So the Climate Superfund proposal directly give 35 to 40% of the funding to these communities. And there are also opportunities to make more targeted investments. Some of the bills are looking at sort of specific ways to use the funds to pay for other environmental justice priorities. Next slide. We believe that this just fits in with a lot of other climate justice campaigns and ways to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable, and is really a way to play offense against big oil in a moment where they have a lot of power and are rolling back a lot of the wins that we've had over the years. And next slide. People love this idea. This holds better than I've been organizing in the climate justice movement for about 15 years. This campaign holds better than any other campaign I've ever worked on. So, even Republicans think that polluters should pay for the climate crisis. And 70% of local voters support making fossil fuel companies pay. It's a really easy concept to talk to people about, and people are excited about the idea. Next slide. Next slide. So I said this before, but several states are currently pursuing climate superfund legislation. Vermont and New York have passed it. We've also seen the bill introduced in Maryland, Massachusetts, California, Minnesota, Illinois, New Jersey, Oregon, Maine, Rhode Island, Virginia, DC. I might have actually missed a couple of states. I updated this slide earlier today, and more and more campaigns are popping up all the time. And there are also a few states that haven't introduced bills yet, but are starting to sort of run organizing campaigns around this issue. Next slide. How can you plug in? Next slide. So we're really building sort of a national campaign around this and bringing together states and national orgs that are working on these campaigns. We have a listserv. We have a regular call that happens. I'll put all these links in the chat. We're also on social media and have actually been working on sort of alternative ways to reach people through social media. And so you can follow us there. I'm also happy to have a one-on-one if folks are interested in plugging into these campaigns. And then I'll just close by talking for a minute about next slide. Because this effort has been so successful, big oil is fighting back, and they are trying to introduce federal legislation that would essentially give them legal immunity from their products, similar to what the gun industry was able to pass to make them not legally liable for any kind of mass shooting or anything that happens with guns. So right now, gas lobbyists are urging Congress and Trump to give them shipping legal protection. And we are simultaneously running a national campaign to make sure that this doesn't happen. We're also joining with other national campaigns against other kinds of corporate immunity. So this is a big fight that we're up against now. We think we can win it. We think we can hold it back. But if it did pass, it would undermine a lot of the efforts that are happening across the country to hold the industry accountable. So we are working hard to make sure that doesn't happen simultaneously while pushing these state bills. So that's all I got for now. I'm excited for Khan's presentation. I believe Khanh introduced this bill in Oregon, so I don't think we'll be talking about that today, but thank you for doing that. And thank you all.
Thank you so much, Sara. That was great. Um, yeah, so if you have any questions or perspectives you like to share, I know, like Sara said, a lot of states have introduced climate super fund bills or are considering that. Please feel free to drop them in the chat or use the Q&A feature. We'll have a Q&A after a few more of our speakers. But yeah, a lot of us are fighting to phase out fossil fuels. And I think notions like polluter pays and climate super fund bills are really great policies that can help usher a lot of accountability into that process. So I'm not surprised to see that big oil is fighting back to that piece. Um, Awesome. So next, we're going to move into a local implementation example of um, another kind of non-ratepayer funded solution here. So we have Pham, who will walk us through the Portland Clean Energy Fund and focus on how revenue is generated there and how they allocate funds and the ways that that's reaching households in practice. So with that, Khanh, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Crystal. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Pham, and I'm a senior fellow here at the Just Solutions Collective. Well, now we're just called Just Solutions. And yeah, I'm here to talk about the Portland Clean Energy Fund as an example of a climate justice initiative that also is um, effectively lowering rates for oops, sorry. There we go. For low-income communities and communities of color. So really quickly, just about myself. As I mentioned, I'm a senior fellow here at Just Solutions, and when I'm not here at Just Solutions, I also serve as a state senator in Oregon, representing Northeast and Southeast Portland. And before that, I was a longtime community organizer with groups like Apano, Opal, and the Oregon Just Transition Alliance. And so I'm here to share my story about helping to build PSEF and what it does and what it's been able to win for communities. So it started out way back in 2016, the first Trump era, and we as a coalition of communities of color were facing just significant, we're just facing the challenge that our communities were being hit hardest by climate disasters and at the same time, our communities were being excluded from the jobs, opportunities, and most importantly, the cost savings that come from this transition to a renewable economy. And when we would come to our city councilors mostly, but also state legislators, we were just told there's just not enough money for the kinds of projects that we wanted to see, the kinds of job training programs, just any of the vision and ideas that we brought. So we went about finding a revenue mechanism. So the Portland Clean Energy Fund initiative is basically a 1% surcharge on billion-dollar corporations that make at least $1 billion nationally in sales and at least $500,000 in Portland sales. So it only affects the largest retail chains like Walmart, Amazon, Target. None of even our biggest local stores are just not impacted. You have to get to $1 billion in national sales. And all of that goes into a fund that then creates, oh my God, this is a little bit out of date, sorry. It creates actually $200 million in annual revenue for green jobs and healthy homes, prioritizing frontline communities. So low-income Portlanders, and particularly trying to make sure we reach communities of color. We've got this as, this is very much in line with the just transition framework of really trying to move from an extractive economy to a more regenerative and equitable economy. It was really about drawing down some of the wealth and power from the international, multinational corporations down to the local level to shift economic control to our communities while advancing ecological restoration and social and racial equity. So it was a huge campaign that involved um, tons of organizing from groups that had never had any experience organizing before. We led with the model of frontline community-led leadership, but with a lot of support from predominantly white environmental organizations who also provide a lot of capacity and planning for, not planning, but they really provided a lot of the volunteer petition drive signature gatherers and other folks like that. So in 2018, PSEF midterm is actually very similar. It feels very similar to now because midterm in a Trump held administration, the Portland Clean Energy Fund passed on a nearly 2-to-1 basis. It was one of the few climate initiatives that passed nationwide that year. And I really think it was the strength of our coalition that made a difference. We went up against some of the biggest corporations in the country, in the world, really. But because they actually, saw that we were incredibly popular, they must have seen the polling, and they fought us. But I think what they really tried to do was really try to undermine us afterwards. But I'll talk about that in a minute. But we ever since after starting in 2019, we have started the revenue division has started to collect this surcharge in a designated fund. And now we have a 9-person grant making committee that sets the larger vision for this now $200 million a year fund that has $1 billion over a 5-year period. And they set these large goals and vision through the climate investment plan, which was developed through a year-long process with intensive open houses and public comments. The climate investment plan was then approved and adopted by the city council. And then the PSEF staff working with the grant committee implements the plan through grant making and supporting the grantee. So, the before the climate investment plan, we've actually given out a number of community responsive grants. I could show you a list. I mean, the list is huge with pages and pages long. It includes the African American Alliance for Home Ownership, working with people they've already served in installing heat pumps and energy efficient retrofits. Constructing Hope works with returning citizens, folks coming out of prison, people formerly incarcerated, people who want to seek a career in green building and clean energy projects. So they're developing workforce development programs, and the Community Energy Project is retrofitting low-income housing. There's Douglas Heat Pump Program. There's just so many programs. There's the Cooling Portland Initiative. which in the midst of it was launched amidst a really devastating heat dome event in Portland. And it installed over 10,000 free air conditioners, energy efficient heat pump cooling units, really, um, within the space of 2 or 3 years. And now they're just doing another 10,000 heat pumps or cooling units um, this year and next year to make sure that as we face extreme climate disasters, including heat waves, we want to make sure that we don't have any more people dying in these new climate disasters, which Portland has never really had to face historically. We've People just don't have air conditioners because our city has not gotten that hot. But now with climate change, we see that this is really a life or death issue. It's also been funding really important transportation decarbonization programs, like helping to fund a future bus-only um, bus rapid transit along 82nd Avenue, as well as a really popular, just launched e-bike rebate program so that Portlanders can qualify for almost free e-bikes, adaptive bikes, and cargo bikes. A lot of families now, with the rising price of gas, can't afford a car. Cars are extremely expensive now. The New York Times just reported there's no such thing as an affordable car anymore. And so this provides a less polluting alternative to get people to work and school, healthcare appointments, and where they need to go. We've also found that with this burgeoning fund, it's also been a tempting pot of funding to save the city budget, which is in major budget deficit right now. Um, this is just a snapshot from 2024 about some of the money that both current and pending allocations to different bureaus. Um, I'll, we can talk about that a little bit later, but basically, I would just say I think the lessons that we've learned from the Portland Clean Energy Fund are that taxing billion-dollar corporations works, especially after Trump's tax cuts, especially the second round. These billion-dollar corporations are still making billions of dollars. We just have to build the political power through organizing and coalition building to win it for the climate and energy affordability solutions that our communities need. I'm not saying it's easy. They definitely are going to be fighting us with every dollar they have. So we have to be smart about finding the right revenue mechanisms with opponents that are unpopular um, and less powerful in the jurisdiction that we're fighting in. I think fossil fuel companies, as Sara was saying, are great opponents. I think data centers are really great opponents, big tech, and billion-dollar corporations. Even in Even Walmart with all of its, power and even Amazon with all of their power and lobbying money, they weren't able to effectively move move a city like Portland. And so we just have to be really smart about which fights we choose. But I think the money is out there, and clearly we were expecting much less money, but because with the shift to the online economy and these billion-dollar corporations doing better than ever, um, unfortunately, actually, I would say they are fortunately and unfortunately they have plenty of money to be contributing to the communities that they're extracting from. So I would say a final lesson is that we have to be prepared to defend our policies even after we win them at the ballot. Implementation is a really key, often ignored part of the campaign, and um, we are continuing to see attacks on the Portland Clean Energy Fund and other entities, like the police union and other entities wanting to raid the Portland Clean Energy Fund. But I'll just end with this one quote from Movement Generation, an organization that I really look up to. They have a saying, if we're not prepared to govern, we're not prepared to win. And I think it's important that our climate and energy justice movements are really thinking about the solutions we need to actually govern to get the wins that our communities need. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions later or during the breakout groups.
I really like that ending quote. So yeah, like what stands out to me about PSEF in particular is the combination of using local or being able to hold local revenue and mixing that with community governance to shape where those funds go and delivering them to the community with workforce development programs, energy efficiency work, et cetera. I think that's really powerful and I wonder as folks are hearing that, if you could imagine a similar fund in your state and what could those considerations look like. Um, and so again, feel free to drop questions in the chat and in the Q&A box. I know we have a couple already. But one of our last speakers today will be Guillermo Rogel Jr. with Front and Centered Washington. And he'll walk us through Washington's Cap and Invest program, which is another state level example of ways some of our energy affordability strategies can be funded and financed. So with that, Guillermo, off to you.
Thank you so much, Crystal, and thanks Just Solutions for having me. I love the work that you all are doing. Love to see the growth, and I'm happy to be here today to present on some of the work that's going on here in Washington State. And I'm really glad that Sarah went up first, because the making polluters pay is something that we're considering here in Washington State. And so we're sort of in the beginning stages of building a coalition because even though we have this mechanism in Washington State, the Cap and Invest program, there is still a structural budget deficit here in Washington State, which means a lot of climate revenue that is coming from this program that I'm going to speak to is sort of getting siphoned off to fill some budget holes, like even just in the transportation process. And so when we all know the transportation budget can be pretty expensive. And so we're sort of running into this issue where even though we have climate revenue, we're not seeing all of the investment that we know that we need. But just as an introduction to myself and to Front and Centered, my name is Guillermo Rogel, and I'm the political manager with the coalition. Front and Centered is a community-based coalition that operates out of Washington State, and we have different community organizations across the state. Some of them are focused on climate and environmental justice priorities. Others are working on immigrant and refugee-based advocacy. Maybe they're more working on just connecting people to different services, or there might be disability advocates, different affinity groups. And so what we try to do is try to be the coalition that helps folks understand what's going on in the climate environmental justice space and make sure that the voice of communities of color, frontline communities, low income populations are informing the policy that's coming out of the state legislature, which is primarily where our advocacy is based out of. We look to different member organizations that might be operating in like Seattle or Tacoma, Spokane, Bellingham, and just see like are there projects that you all are working on, different policy initiatives that can be scaled up, and that can be replicated at the state level. And so we're always looking to our members who are organizing locally for those ideas, and then also looking to other states to see if there's anything that we can borrow from states like New York or New Jersey, New Mexico, just to see if what works there can work here. And so my job is to lobby the state legislature and then also bring our members to the Capitol, to different town halls across the state when they're happening, just to make sure that our community members are also plugged in and that they can talk about their own policy priorities with the state legislature and the governor's office as well. I wanted to speak to the Cap and Invest program. So it's the Climate Commitment Act, as it's known here in Washington State, the CCA for short. We refer to it as cap and trade. There has sort of been this like messaging back and forth because this was being pushed for a repeal in the 2024 election. And the proponents behind the CCA really wanted to call it cap and invest. But just being really straightforward here, front and centered, when the CCA was being proposed in 2021, which is the year it passed, we were against the cap and trade program more because our coalition doesn't believe in really market-based, incentive-based approaches to reducing our carbon emissions. Um, Front and centered as a coalition 2 years prior to this bill passing, had actually put on a ballot initiative to the people, which failed, I think, 48% to 51%, around there. where it was just a straight tax and just saying these companies, if you are a big polluter in the state, you will be subject to this tax. That revenue will then go to all of these climate and environmental justice priorities. Since it failed in 2021, what was being proposed was this cap and trade system where we still had that tax, but these different corporations, big polluters, would actually have to buy allowances on this new market and then trade those different allowances between themselves. And basically, it's a permit to pollute. All of these different allowances that folks purchase are permits to pollute. And the theory behind it is that if we make it expensive to pollute and lower the amount of allowances year after year, then hopefully that incentivizes folks to reduce their carbon emissions. What we're trying to do is make sure that now that that program is actually in place and it wasn't repealed, that the funding actually goes to where we want to, like to our frontline communities, to environmental justice initiatives, which Khanh, I'm glad that you mentioned like different weatherization efforts, because that's part of what we're also focusing on as well. Just general energy affordability measures. Um, but where cap and trade kind of is good is that it has generated a ton of revenue. Over just the last 4 years, the program has generated a little bit over $4 billion. So on average, it's about $1 billion in revenue. And so what we were able to do in 2021 when it passed was to say that 35% of these funds must go to what the state defines as overburdened communities. And we have a map that I can drop in the chat, but that actually highlights 16 different communities across the state, which are designated as overburdened. And this was a whole kind of process that we had to go through with the Department of Ecology to say, what is an overburdened community? How are we defining that? And we have here in Washington State the Environmental Health Disparities Map, which folks can plug in their address, and it shows all those different social determinants of health that impact someone's life expectancy or a community's health. And so, we can talk about the different kinds of pollution that might exist in the air, in the water, in the soil that has an impact on someone's life expectancy, and compare that, zip code to zip code. And so we're able to see like if we are generating this much revenue, 35% of that at a minimum, which is just the goal, must go to these communities. But for us, what we're really trying to tell the state legislature is that we can generate all of this revenue, but if we are not actually reducing our carbon emissions, if we are not actually reducing our health disparities, are we just sort of throwing money at the problem? And so for us, the revenue generation is great, but what we really want to do is partner with the state legislature to make sure that we're actually meeting those goals in the long run. And the way that we look at the cap and trade program is sort of in three different buckets. One of them is resiliency, affordability, and then the actual transition to a clean energy economy, which is getting us to make sure that we're actually building clean energy projects. And so for us, what we're trying to give. Okay, thanks, Al. But for us, what we're trying to do specifically around energy affordability is focus on energy assistance because what we're seeing right now in Washington State is that just across, even just nationally, energy rates are going up. And so here in Washington, we're seeing an average of 12% increase across the state on folks' utility bills, which is getting worse right now with all of the different international conflicts that are going on. And we were able to successfully pass a bill this last year. It just got signed actually 2 weeks ago, which was House Bill 1903, which was specifically creating an energy assistance program that would be funded through the Climate Commitment Act. And the reason that we did that was there was a years long study where we were trying to get a sense of what is the current energy burden. And the way that we defined energy burden was 6%, if folks are paying more than 6% of their monthly income on their utility bills, they are going to be energy burdened by this definition in this study. And for us to alleviate that burden, to make sure that our most low income households are not facing that burden, we would need around $275 million to alleviate that burden. And we were looking right at the Climate Commitment Act because something that's been happening over the last few years as this program has been operating is that there is a lot of unanticipated revenue. The auction prices, the allowance prices for the Climate Commitment Act are more than expected. Ideally, they want to sell these allowance prices for 25 to 30-ish dollars. They're actually selling at around $60 to $70. And so that means what the legislature is allocating for all of these different climate projects, they're actually getting more revenue than anticipated, which is great for all of these climate environmental justice initiatives. But something coming down the line for us that we're trying to pay attention to as well is linkage, because Quebec has its own cap and trade market. California has its own. Now Washington has its own. And so this linkage, what the Department of Ecology and the governor's office are saying, is that it will help stabilize the price, lower the price, um, which does mean a lower amount in revenue for the next few years. It hasn't happened yet, but that is something that we are anticipating. So there is like a whole spreadsheet that I could share with just solutions about where this funding is actually going. Um, energy assistance is just a portion of it, but there are weatherization projects to make sure that we are actually helping folks' house be more resilient to extreme weather events, transitioning folks from gas to electric, different transportation projects that are more geared towards public transit, helping increase the safety of pedestrians and sidewalks, EV charging stations. And so that's where the program has been good in generating this revenue. But for us, the way that we're seeing the cap and trade in the long run is that this is only one tool in the toolbox. It can't be the main tool that we actually use to reduce carbon emissions. And so for us, we're ideating, we're talking about what are different ways that maybe we can look at where projects are getting cited, what kind of industries are violating their permits, and if there is a way that we can, even data centers in that emerging conversation, is there a way that we can talk about some of the most harmful effects that are currently existing in our communities and projects that are being proposed at the moment? So um, that's sort of like a really quick primer on the Climate Commitment Act and the cap and trade program here. As I mentioned, we are looking at like making polluters pay as a different alternative for generating revenue here in Washington State because we don't have all the funding that we need, even just in the climate space. And as I had mentioned at the top, Washington State really is in this budget deficit. And so they're pulling money from all of these other spaces that have dedicated revenue. For example, even higher education has higher dedicated revenue that the state is looking to take some funding from. So that's just where we're at, and happy to, if folks want to be plugged into the conversation around what making polluters pay will look like, or this energy assistance program, happy to connect. I'll drop my name and email in the chat. But yeah, just wanted to thank you again, Crystal, for having front and center here to present, and happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Guillermo. Really appreciate that overview.